Hey guys, welcome to our next video in Unit 8 on the legislative branch or Congress. Today we are going to be talking about congressional leadership. Basically this is going to be talking about the hierarchy of power in both chambers of Congress, meaning in the House as well as the Senate. So first things first, I wanted to give a brief overview of the 116th Congress. So if you remember talking about in class, every 2 years there is a new session of Congress. So this session of Congress started on January 3rd, 2019. The next session of Congress will begin on January 3rd, 2021. And this is our most diverse session yet. We have the most diversity in terms of demographics, religion, socioeconomic status, but it is still not representative of the public at large, the constituencies, the people that the representatives and senators actually represent in their job. So looking at this, ultimately, we have to think that Congress has been male dominated since 1789, since the very first session. Female membership has grown, of course, as we will see, but the majority still is male. The majority is college educated, and they have above average incomes, meaning that more than half of the membership even has a net worth of more than $1 million, which is quite substantially larger than the average American income. And the average age in the House is 58, whereas in the Senate it's 62. And just talking about their backgrounds, most people or representatives and senators in Congress have backgrounds in law, public service, and business. So they do have a lot of experience in the type of policies and things that they are actually creating once they get into Congress itself. Now, I wanted to talk about a breakdown of the party demographics in Congress. This is your party in the House of Representatives as well as in the Senate. So as you can see, of the 435 members of the House of Representatives, there is a Democratic majority. There are 232 seats that are Democratic, and there is a Republican minority in the House of Representatives currently with 197 seats. Now, this is not 435 if you're doing any math, but there are currently 5 vacant seats that will need to be filled. So depending on how this goes in the 2020 election, this number may change, as always. And then in the Senate, down at the bottom graph here, you can see that there is a Republican majority with 53 seats and a Democratic minority with 45 seats. And these two dots, again, if you do the math, that's not 100, but these tiny blue dots represent the independents of the Senate. So they don't lean either, but when they vote, they tend to vote democratically. That's why they're tinted blue. Just wanted to show you guys the change over time in terms of minority representation in Congress. So this is showing you the demographic changes from the 107th Congress in 2001 to today's Congress of 2019. Or 2020 even, the same session. So as you can see, we've had an increase in the number of Black, Hispanic, Asian, and Native American over time, and this is continuing to be the case as we go from session to session of Congress. This session has also set a record for the most number of women. There are 131 women in Congress today, and we do have more religious diversity than ever before. Now, we're not completely diverse. Most representatives do identify as Christian, whether that's Protestant or Catholic, but there is more religious diversity than ever before since 1789. Okay, let's talk about the leadership structure of Congress. So as you can see, the House and the Senate have hierarchical structures. Okay, there's someone at the top, and then they delegate authority and responsibility to lower members of the chain. Okay, and we're going to talk about each individual chamber separately. Okay, now the first thing to note is that there are only three of these positions are actually mentioned in the Constitution, and those are the Speaker of the House, the vice president, and the president pro tempore of the Senate. That's it. The Constitution then states that each chamber may choose their other officers. So that's how we get the majority and minority leaders, the majority and minority whips, and the majority and minority caucuses and conference chairs. Okay. Now, at the start of each congressional session, each chamber will elect their leaders. So the House parties will get together, the Senate parties will get together, and they will form party caucuses. These are groups of the entire party membership within each chamber, and they will gather to determine their choices for the leadership positions. So the Republicans in the House will get together and decide, all right, who do we want for in this case, the Republicans, as we said, are the minorities in the House. Who do we want for the minority leader, the minority whip, and the minority caucus and conference chairs? Okay, and then vice versa with the parties and in the Senate. Okay. Now, when they go to vote for the leadership positions, it is almost invariably, without a doubt, a party line vote, meaning Republicans vote for Republicans, Democrats vote for Democrats. Okay. And I wanted to clarify something before we move any further. If you are confused as to what I'm talking about when it comes to majority and minority, this is referring to the number of seats that each party has. So if there are more Democratic seats than Republican seats, the Democratic would get the majority positions versus the Republican minority positions. So obviously this is not set in stone. This changes with elections. So don't think about it like the majority leader is always of a certain party and the minority leader is always of a certain party. It depends on how many seats there are of each party in Congress. Okay, let's start with the House of Representatives and this one, the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House is probably the most powerful person in Congress itself. They are elected by the whole House of Representatives, and they are always of the majority party. So right now we have a Democratic majority. Nancy Pelosi is a Democrat. She's the Speaker. So that is always the case. The Speaker is also second in line to succeed the President after the Vice President. So according to the 25th Amendment, if the President is unable to serve, it's then the Vice President, then the Speaker of the House. And they preside over the House while it's in session. Their major role being making committee assignments, so who is on what committee in Congress, and deciding and assigning bills to be voted on, debated, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll talk about that bill to law process in another video, but that is the main role of the Speaker of the House. Okay, let's move to the majority and minority leaders in the House of Representatives. These leaders are also known as floor leaders, and the floor is where all of the conversation and debate and action happens in Congress. So these leaders lead debate among their parties, and they guide the discussion from their side of the aisle or their ideology. So when they're discussing a bill, they are the first speakers to be recognized in debate by the Speaker of the House. So they have the floor first to talk about their party's wishes and complaints or positives about whatever bill is being discussed. And they have also, in recent years, become the spokespersons for the party in the media. So you will also see the House majority and minority leaders representing their parties when you turn on the news, for example. Now, the Speaker of the House will look to these leaders for committee assignments and also scheduling bills that will eventually maybe make it to the floor for debate and voting. Right. So below the leaders, whether that's the majority or minority, we have the House majority and minority whips. Now, the whips are in charge of party discipline, which sounds kind of strange, but their job is to keep the tally of votes among party members. So they're looking like, okay, we have so many seats in our party. Who's voting in what way? Are they voting on party line or not? Okay. Their job is to also look at the party members who are not leaning towards party line and strong-arming them, or strongly encouraging, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, the party members to vote with their party, like if they're on the fence, for example. And they do this by offering political favors, even endorsements during elections, as that can have a persuasive influence for that representative that is ultimately up for re-election every 2 years. The whips will also kind of keep track of their party members, make sure that they're in good standing, that they're acting ethically, and they can even ask a member to step down from their position or leave Congress themselves. Okay, and then finally, as you can see, we have the majority and minority caucus or conference chairs. And this is the name given to a meeting of or organization of all party members in the House. And they take care of all party matters. They head the organization of party-centered groups. So really, we'll talk about this more when we get to how a bill becomes a law. But I just wanted to give a definition of these members right now. Okay, let's move over to the Senate. So if you take a look at the Senate hierarchy, you will notice that aside from these two positions, this bottom part is essentially the same. You've got majority and minority leaders, majority and minority whips, and the majority and minority caucuses and conference chairs. And that's set up on purpose, right? This is supposed to be checks and balances between the two chambers of Congress. Now, the only difference is the leadership at the very, very top of the Senate. And the Senate is predominantly presided over by the vice president. Now, the vice president, according to the Constitution, may have the presiding role, but they are a non-voting member. They only vote if there is a tie to break. So technically, they're the 51st member, the 101st member of Congress, but they only vote if there is a tie. And in fact, they're even rarely in the Senate. They delegate most of their responsibilities to debate and committee regulations to the president pro tempore or other members of the Senate. So the president pro tempore is that final position that's listed in the Constitution, and they preside over the Senate in the absence of the vice president. And just looking at the 25th Amendment, how the vice president would take over if the president were unable to serve, then the speaker. The president pro tempore is third in line behind the VP and the speaker. Okay. Now, this president pro tempore is technically just an honorary title. Really doesn't have any real power, but usually this is the senior most member of the majority party. Senior, not necessarily meaning old, but the person who, of the majority party, has been in the Senate the longest. So currently, this member or this president pro tempore, the current one, has been in the Senate since 1980. So they are the senior most member in the Senate of the Republican Party. Now, let's talk about the majority and minority leaders in the Senate. Really, there's not too much difference between them and their House counterparts. But the Senate majority leader, because of the absence of the VP and simply the honorary title of the president pro tempore, the Senate majority leader actually has quite a bit of sway in the legislative agenda. They're kind of the real, quote-unquote, official leader of the Senate. They're the first, again, recognized in debate, and really they set the legislative calendar for the Senate. They decide which bills go to debate and which do not. They guide the party caucus on issues and party proposals, and the Senate minority leader does very similar actions, but just not to the extent of the Senate majority leader. Now, there's not too much to say about the Senate majority whips and minority whips and the majority and minority caucuses and conference chairs. They are the same as their House of Representative counterparts. So this was just a very brief overview of the leadership in Congress. In class, we are actually going to be taking a look at the members who comprise these leadership roles. So make sure to bring any questions that you guys have about these hierarchical structures and congressional leadership, and I will see you guys soon. Bye-bye.